2018 is sponsored by Wisconsin Hospital Association, Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Realtors Association, Marshfield Clinic Health System, AARP Wisconsin, and Campaign 2018 partner Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel.
Elizabeth Riley of Hayward is a Democrat running in the 87th Assembly District. Elizabeth, welcome back to WisconsinEye.
Thank you for having me.
What do you consider the top issue in this campaign?
Oh, I guess there are, I'm just going to have to say there are three top issues for me. They are education, the environment, and healthcare. And there are a myriad of things underneath all of those that are top issues for me.
Let's talk about education. There's an increase in the current state budget for state aid for K-12 schools. How well funded are public schools? Do they need another big increase in the next budget?
I appreciate that question. To me, that $200 per student that the Walker administration has put out there is nothing more than political pandering. $200 per student doesn't even bring us close to where we were in 2009, let alone 2010 when the Walker administration started their reign here. So yes, we need more funding, and it's not just K-12, it's through the entire program. We're talking K-12, we're talking what our university system that used to be great, and now seeing professors leaving Madison taking their grant money with them is a huge problem, and all of that is related to funding for our schools. We're sitting in a technical college right now. Technical colleges have had their funding slashed, so yes, it is a huge problem.
Now, you mentioned the UW system. Should the freeze on resident undergrad tuition continue for a 7th and 8th year?
I don't think it should. I understand the dilemma that students are in when they try to go to college and rack up huge amounts of debt. But freezing student tuition is not going to help solve that problem. There are other ways of looking at funding that we can use to support our schools. But freezing tuition is not going to help what's going on with education in general.
You mentioned healthcare. I've got 3 questions on that. How do we protect and expand healthcare in rural areas of Wisconsin?
That is a really good question, and it's interesting that you ask that, because right now I work as a case manager, and part of what I do is trying to get people basically out of the hospital. They come in, we get people who have sometimes no insurance, frequently some form of medical assistance, trying to get people out of the hospital when they have no money, very limited funding sources to pay for health care, and no place to go. Where do we put these people? These are the most vulnerable people in our communities, and they need our help, and the way health care is underfunded in the state of Wisconsin, we wind up paying a lot more for less, and that's been the way of it since the Affordable Care Act came through, also known as Obamacare, but the Affordable Care Act is what it was initially called. When Governor Walker decided to turn down federal funding to help expand Medicaid, we wound up paying over $1 billion more for fewer services and fewer people being served.
Now, you're trained as a nurse.
Yes.
Does state government have a role in recruiting and retaining doctors, nurses, and other medical professionals, Elizabeth?
I think they should, and I think they should expand that to teachers. Instead of doing that, however, we see people in state government vilifying professionals. There has been a move within the Republican administration to say that teachers don't need college degrees, that other professionals might not need education in order to do what they do. And I think that's a terrible, even thinking that is a terrible thing. So yes, on the one hand, I think that we should provide better funding to people to help doctors, nurses, physicians, mid-levels, physician assistant, nurse practitioners, all of those people who can provide primary care should have their education funded to some degree. And I don't see any kind of help happening at all. And people, in fact, are leaving rural areas. I work in a rural area right now, and trying to get even family practice physicians to come to rural areas is difficult.
Last question on healthcare. State government and Delta Dental have a plan that supports dental clinics in medically underserved areas. Should that be a priority in the next Medicaid budget?
Yes, it should. It should be a priority for everyone. And I don't think a lot of people understand the connection between poor dental care and heart disease. A direct link between those two things. And I could cite you case after case of people who die of heart disease simply because they could not afford or have access to dental care.
The impasse in the Capitol over how to pay for highways, bridges, and maintenance. If it were up to you, how would you pay for highways?
Well, there are a couple of things I would do. First of all, I would, and people don't like this, I would raise the gas tax. Okay. I think that we use the roads together, and we should be paying for roads together. I don't like what has happened in the current administration to take money that was supposed to go to roads in rural areas and instead move it down to the Milwaukee area, perhaps, so that they can fund roads for what I refer to as that boondoggle Foxconn.
You do not support the Foxconn tax breaks.
I do not support that. Okay. That is, I think. Every now and then someone will accuse me of being a socialist, and I try to gently correct them and say that I know of no completely socialist countries in this world. I don't. There's private enterprise everywhere, and I would like to call myself a compassionate democratic person. I believe that in a compassionate compassionate,
That's okay. That's all right. But I have a related question.
Capitalist. Compassionate capitalist.
Thank you for finishing that thought. Because here's my next question. It's your position on Foxconn is no. What about a homegrown company, Kimberly-Clark? There was an idea floated in August. Let's give Kimberly-Clark to keep open a factory Foxconn-like tax breaks. Have you thought about that?
I have thought about that. And an established business with deep ties to the community is quite different from a foreign-owned entity with no ties to this country, let alone to our area. It's not comparing the same things. Kimberly-Clark has a track record. Foxconn, the only track record Foxconn has is not a good one. If you look at what happened with them when they were still in China. Part of the reason they were leaving China is that they violated China's pollution laws. And let that sentence sink in for a moment. But since we are fast losing any kind of environmental regulations in this country, you can see why they came here.
Local governments have been operating under levy limits for about 13, 15 years. Some local officials say those limits hurt their ability to provide local services. Keep them, ease them, get rid of them.
Don't keep them. I'm not sure about easing them or completely getting rid of them because, frankly, I don't know enough about them. All I know is that what it boils down to is the state telling local communities what they can and can't do as far as being able to create their own funding sources for everything from their schools to parks and everything else that they want to have that make their communities good places for people to want to settle. To leave this as a certain percentage of revenue that comes from new business that forms, I think, is ridiculous. There are certainly areas of my district that simply don't have the new enterprises, the ability to attract new enterprises coming in. And it doesn't matter how many times Governor Walker and his Republican colleagues say Wisconsin is open for business, we're not.
State government has authorized the spending of up to $100 million on school safety measures. Is that enough, or do we need to change gun laws?
I think we need to change gun laws. And I know there are a lot of people who are going to hear that sentence and they're going to think she wants to get rid of guns. That is not what I am saying. I am saying we need to change gun laws. There are things that we could do that are easy enough, such as universal background checks, mandatory liability insurance for gun owners. There are all kinds of things that we could do that would help make things safer. But certainly arming teachers, which is a rallying cry for the Republican Party, is not the answer. My husband is an English teacher, and the thought of him wielding a gun in his Hayward classroom, if it weren't so tragic, would make me laugh.
A big question in the next state budget is, do we need a new state prison? We have two that were built in the 1800s in Waupun and Green Bay. Your position?
My position is that we do not need a new prison. What we need to do is take people out of our prisons who are there for nonviolent drug offenses. If we have people who are, and we do, we have I think we're one of the highest, have one of the highest incarceration rates in the country. And there are a lot of people who are languishing in prison who really should not be there. We have broken up families, we have broken up homes. We put people in prison because they have marijuana on them, and they get caught a few times and they go to prison. What we need to do is not build new prisons, but help people not get in there in the first place. And again, that goes down to things like education funding, healthcare funding, and decriminalizing marijuana.
Well, that was my next question. Do you support both legalizing medical marijuana and, you use the term decriminalize? Is that a nuanced thing?
No, I don't think.
Does that amount to legalizing recreational marijuana?
Yes, to legalize, I would say legalize medical and recreational marijuana. From a healthcare standpoint, there are a lot of benefits to it. But if you look at states where it has been legalized, their tax coffers have really benefited from this. And that's a wonderful untapped funding source that we would have, in addition to helping provide justice for everyone in this country who is sitting in a prison right now due to some marijuana laws.
Let's return to school funding. You use an example on your campaign website that I find very intriguing. State aid to the Hayward district, where your husband teaches, has gone down from 20% to 3% over what period?
I want to say since 2011, not only with Act 10, but with other funding that has gone by the wayside. They keep cutting, and so now the percentage that they, and I'm going to interrupt myself here for just a minute to say this ties in with not being able to create levies in our towns. If we're stuck at a certain level, we can't make up that difference ourselves, even if we want to. Even if people in Sawyer County say wanted to vote for a referendum, and they don't. We've had a couple referenda up there saying let's get some more money for our schools, and people have twice voted it down. I think that's a mistake. But again, if you're looking at an area where incomes are low, where people are not making the money they once did or that they should be able to have in order to live at a $7.25 minimum wage, it's no wonder they vote those down. People don't have the extra money.
And the minimum wage should be what?
If I were going to put a number on it, I would go with the $15 an hour, because there's no way anyone can afford to live on much less than that. There are no rents that anybody could have anywhere, I don't think, in the state at $7.25 an hour.
Excuse me. Part of the debate over how you pay for K-12 schools is the choice in the voucher program. It expanded, started in Milwaukee to Racine, now statewide. Expand further, or would you curtail it?
I would do away with it. Not just curtail it, do away with it.
Even in Milwaukee where it started 30
Even in
years
Milwaukee
ago?
where it started 30 years ago, because I don't think its intention was ever meant to do anything more than to take funding away from public education and put it into the hands of private entities.
Final question, differences between you and the Republican incumbent you're challenging on November 6th?
I think that our differences are fundamental. He supports everything that the Republican administration has put forward. Degradation of our air and water quality, defunding our school system, although they would tell you different because they're just adding $200 per student. That's a drop in the bucket. It's like throwing a rock to someone who's drowning instead of throwing them a life preserver. That's what that $200 is. I think that Representative Edming and I differ on everything.
Thank you. Elizabeth Riley of Hayward is the Democratic candidate in the 87th Assembly District. The election is November 6th. Elizabeth, thank you for visiting with WisconsinEye.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Campaign 2018 is sponsored by Wisconsin Hospital Association, Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Realtors Association, Marshfield Clinic Health System, AARP Wisconsin, and Campaign 2018 partner Milwaukee Journal Sentinel.